Hey guys, have you ever wondered what it would have been like to have been at one of the world's first gun shows? Well, today I'm going to take you there. Okay, that was a big tease, but I'm going to a gun show in just a few minutes. I'm getting in the car heading out to the MAC show in York. And that reminded me that I have pictures of what I'm going to call one of the world's first gun shows. It's actually piles of guns. This is actually British troops taking the surrender of German soldiers, and they just have guns piled up. And my favorite fantasy is you have an hour to go through this pile and you can pick out any 3 guns or any 5 guns you want. The other thing that I often think about is whenever one of my collector friends passes away, we always use the expression, he went to the great gun show in the sky. And this is what it would be like. Imagine being there when this equipment was all first surrendered, or as it was coming out of the factory, and you get to pick up some of these treasures in pristine condition. So let's take a walk through this gun show and show you some of the treasures from 1945. So this is the first picture, and all of these photographs are from Denmark, the surrender of the German troops, and I believe it was May. I know it was May of 1945. I want to say May 4th or 5th. The Germans surrendered and turned in all their weapons. Now the troops are all British. Hats off to the Brits. Hip hip, and their new king. But anyway, I digress. I'm told that this is the 2nd Battalion King's Rifle Regiment. The first thing I want to focus on, well, my eyes go immediately to these P-38s and or Lugers, but we should actually need to look at their rifles. Obviously all Enfields in really nice condition. It does strike me that they do have their bayonets. Both soldiers have their bayonets, which tells me that they were ready in case things went bad. On the other hand, as we look at the German soldiers, there's two standing over here. As we look at the German soldiers, they seem very nonchalant and like everything was very peaceable and friendly. What he's loading into this car, you can see black Luger holsters and P-38 holsters. Definitely P-38 holsters stand out. There's probably some Luger holsters in it as well. And they're loading it into the back of this car. Later, we're going to see them loading them onto trucks. And having talked to GIs who were there, I know that as they went through towns and villages in occupied territories, but also in Germany, that some of the men were tasked with throwing all of these things into trucks and cars, taking them outside the city. They said they had a bulldozer that dug a big hole. They dumped everything in there, poured gasoline on it, and set it on fire. Now, that certainly is not all the guns, obviously. GIs, the U.S. GIs brought home, it's estimated, at least 1 million captured weapons, but there was a lot more that was destroyed. These are being loaded into a car for some unknown reason, but may have been being sent out to be destroyed. One other note, this is obviously a German officer over here, and he has on his hip what I think is a map case, and the reason I find that humorous is we've done this once before. We showed pictures of machine guns from the same era, and almost every picture had an officer with a map case. So I just was curious, where did all the map cases go? Because it seems like they carried a lot of map cases. Okay, here's the second picture, and this is where it begins to get interesting. First thing I noticed, there's 2 trucks, and that goes to my theory that they were just piling them all in trucks and taking them outside of town. Next, I noticed right here a good number of bikes. Now, the German army did procure or take bikes from the Danish population. All the occupied countries, they would round up bikes because they used them for messengers and for getting around. The soldiers actually moving around from place to place on bikes. At the end of the war, of course, they probably turned them all in, and there was a big garage sale, and everybody came over and got a cheap bike. Notice here's where I've talked about the officers and the men are just nonchalantly all chit-chatting, having a smoke. It seems like everything is very relaxed, and you would think they were friendly forces and not enemies. But by this time in the war, I guess the Germans pretty much knew it was over. But we're here to look at guns, so move down a little bit. And this one stands out to me. This is I believe a PP, tan holster. It could have been a private purchase. because it doesn't necessarily, to me, it doesn't look like a military grade holster. Could be. Can't see the Waffen stamps, but that looks like a PP, and that would be one I'd want to take a look at, see if it has Waffen stamps or not. And we can see this German still has his bayonet, and it looks like he has a magazine here. We're going to say more about the magazines. We see the little piece of a Sten right here. Also, this looks like almost like a hunting knife. Does not look like military issue, but this German did keep his knife. So again, they're not real worried. You know, contrast this with the Japanese. They would never let them surrender with a weapon or a knife of any kind, just because they did at the end. They were still suicidal and homicidal, as opposed to the Germans, who seem to be willingly surrendering. This is probably a civilian, but a German, maybe a diplomat or something, because this hat reminds me of a Tyrolean. So I'm assuming this was a civilian, but a party member, party leader perhaps. Okay, now we get to this big pile, and this is fascinating. This is the real gun show part. There's a couple things that jump out at me that I want to make comment on. I always think of the Polish Radom as having gone to the Eastern Bloc or Eastern Front. And yet, as I look at this pile, I see quite a few Polish Radoms. This one right here in the forefront is a Polish Radom. Right here is a Polish Eagle. That holster alone could easily be $2,500 to $3,000, just because it's very, very rare. There's other, this could be Radom. So here's a Radom. That looks like a Radom there. Could be an FN high power. Right here you see a broom handle. That's a broom handle holster, and there's the broom handle sticking out. Here's a P38. There's quite a few of those. Here's a P38. This is a Luger or P38. This looks like Luger or P38. And you can push pause and stop listening to me and just peruse through here. There's definitely a Radom. This is a P38, it looks like. Here's a Luger. Very clear. Now that is a smaller caliber, 7.65. Could be a PP or a PPK, and there's another Radom. Getting back to my point. Now that's a P38, the later soft shell. This could be a Radom here. Front and center is a Reichsrevolver, pretty rare, World War I or between the war era, but that's right on top of the pile. Looks like a Radom here. And right here, that's a Radom. But what I wanted to point out, and I find this fascinating, the magazines have been removed. And as I'm looking at these guns, I see a lot of them, if not most of them, the magazines have been removed. Now, we always knew that the K98s, when they were surrendered, they removed the bolt and threw that in one pile, and then the gun went into a different pile. And that's why we often find K98s with mismatched bolts, that they just were piled up with the bolts removed. But it also seems like when they turned in their sidearms, they removed the magazines. A couple reasons I can think. First of all, they don't want, even though you clear the chamber, they don't want any rounds. All of these guns would have been loaded when they went to surrender. And so they pulled out the magazine and then cleared the chamber. And that's how they know it wasn't loaded. The other reason, if they are taking them to burn pits, they want to throw all these guns into a burn pit. They don't want loaded magazines with the bullets going off with the soldiers standing around the burn pit. So that's conjecture on my part, but I will tell you that to find a matching magazine is pretty rare. And half of the magazines I see are, people call them forced matched. I call them post-factory matched, which just means in order to enhance the value, there have been people who have been able to try to replicate magazines. Usually we're able to recognize when a magazine is original to the factory, and that's why I will describe it as a factory original magazine or a post-factory matching magazine, meaning it was numbered later. If you take a look at some of the guns, it's not necessarily faked, because we know the East Germans, the West Germans, the French, they reworked P38s and Lugers, and they would create new matching magazines. The font is completely different. There's no attempt to deceive. It's just a matter of they reworked them and renumbered the magazines. But it's still post-factory, not necessarily fake. I hope that reasoning makes sense, and you can feel free to comment if you'd like. Let's just go to the other end of the pile, and we still see Lugers and P38s. I know right here we can see a MP40 that was thrown into the pile. And then there's, from the handle, I can tell there's an MP40 here. There's a strap. I believe this is another MP40. This holster looks like an FN holster, but maybe even a commercial FN. There's a barrel of maybe a rifle or a machine gun. And then we see some MP40s over here along the edges, right, front and center, right here at the top, just where his boots are actually. That's clearly the MP40 with the magazine in it, notice, which just dispels some of my theory. And there's another MP40, and there's the mag pouch, which is worth a good deal of money. An original mag pouch with extra magazines. But like I said, you can push pause. We'll pan out and push pause, and you can feel free to go through this and see what else you might see. Before I move on to the next photo, here's a mystery that stands out. This right here looks like the top of a clamshell. I mean, it could be a revolver, but it almost looks like a Nambu clamshell. Of course, you're going to say, don't be stupid. Yeah, it probably isn't, but you can go through here and just see what else you see. But I find it fascinating. Again, great gun show. Like to check out some of these guns. Let's go to the next picture. All right, once again, we see Germans in the background and British soldiers in the foreground. And they're carrying their Enfields, but we can also see, well, there's a German soldier getting in the back of one of these wagons, so they are using horse-drawn wagons. There's one of those bikes that we talked about, and the soldiers, German soldiers, are surrendering, going into wagons for transport, and then a small pile of German Lugers and P38s. Okay, on the third picture, we see some civilians. Actually, there's a photographer. By the way, some of these photographs, I believe, are credited to Life magazine. So there were Western reporters here taking pictures, and then some civilians, and probably some town officials. And then we see one of these bikes. This bike is loaded up with K98s. And on the ground, once again, we'll start at the bottom, but right here at the bottom, the one that stands out is a Sturmgewehr. The magazine is removed. This one looks like it's been sitting in a river. Maybe it's just dirty. Actually, the stock looks almost brand new, and the rest of it looks pretty crappy. So I'm just assuming that's mud or dirt on it and not rust. But there's a Sturmgewehr on the ground. And if you were challenged with taking home one, I'm sure that would be one of the ones you might want to pick up. Over here, we do see a Luger that's cocked, so that tells me they took the magazine out, they pulled the toggle back to clear it, and then left it in that condition to make sure it wasn't loaded, and then you see other Lugers on the ground. Over here is a G43 or K43, and this is a real good example of a beautiful K98. A lot of K98s in this pile. Pointing right at us is a Luger. It looks like it's in pretty good condition. Same as this Luger down here. I'd love to just get the dates and the markings, find out if there's any K dates in there. Here you see Luger on top of the pile. Here's more MP40 magazines. I believe that's another Sturmgewehr right here, and lots of K98s. Again, you can push pause and check that out. The tire here looks like it needs a little bit of air. Okay, now with these pictures we've seen before, meaning I've seen piles of K98s, and again, usually they remove the bolts. Right here, that does look like an intact bolt, but usually I see surrendered weapons with piles of bolts in one pile and then piles of rifles. What's most interesting about this one is they are loading. This is exactly what I was discussing. And by the way, notice that the Germans are loading up the weapons. So they're not real worried about the Germans grabbing a weapon and sticking a bullet in it. This one does also seem to have the bolt, and this is a German soldier. They're just throwing them up in the truck. because of the way they're tossing them. It looks like they're tossing them. I don't think they're sending them out to be re-arsenaled, but rather sending them out to be destroyed. Here's an object that we do sell. That's the magazine pouch for the K98 ammo. Here we see 3 bayonets thrown in the pile. 1, 2, 3. There's definitely a bolt in this one. So we see 2 butts. I like big butts, cannot lie, but there's a K98 butt, and that looks like a K43 butt, to show the different weapons that are in this pile. One more time, there's one of those famous Danish. The Dutch and the Danes, and actually the French as well, they rode a lot of bikes. Okay, this is our final picture. Nothing really new here other than you do see they use horse-drawn carts. The Germans have surrendered, and they're just, fairly nonchalantly just walking around and ready to go home. They're not being attacked by the civilians or by the British. It certainly is not at all like what you would see on the Eastern Front, or actually there was really not a lot of combat in Denmark. It remained fairly unscathed, so that might be one of the reasons that they seem so nonchalant. There wasn't a lot of hostilities there, is what I'm saying. I know people will take exception to that, but I think in other more hostile regions, this scene would not be prevalent. You wouldn't see soldiers just milling about, driving carts with belongings, with rifles stacked all around. So let's take a look at these K98s over here. I don't think there's anything new, but I do see bolts in the rifles, so that's noteworthy. Here they were not removing the bolts, they were just dropping their weapons and throwing them along the side of the road. Hey, thanks for going with me to one of these early gun shows. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'm sure some of you will find some things that I didn't even notice, so make sure you like and subscribe to our channel, but leave comments about things that you saw, maybe some of the different ranks, or some of your observations. These were just my personal observations. I find it fascinating, but I love hearing from all of you.